Coming somewhat out of left field, November is National Novel Writing Month, and I've decided to, I don't know what the term is, I guess I've entered National Novel Writing Month with the aim of writing a 50,000-word novel at the conclusion of November. It's pretty ambitious, and it's something that I think will challenge me in a variety of different directions, but also it has the ability to create a community around this novel writing process. I have maybe 5 novels just simmering. A couple of them are more than simmering. But out of those 5, I've decided not to write on those topics. Well, I don't know. I mean, in some regard, it's writing on some of the topics. But I have a novel idea associated with what it is like to live in my community as an entry-level gang member in a local gang. And this is something that has fascinated me for quite some time. And I've meditated on it quite heavily because there are a number of really active gangs in this area. But I've often wondered what would happen if an intellectual, not necessarily a, university-educated intellectual, but someone who seeks for deep meaning was in this circumstance. And what fascinates me through this is there are many different directions this thing could take. And obviously it's semi-fictional. I mean, I'm not a member of a local gang. But it gives an opportunity to explore a number of the really curious and darker juxtapositions that I face in my local community just through observation. And a number of the really interesting and compelling paradoxes that exist here, I think, is worthy of some sustained writing. So that is, in a brief description, what I'm going to be writing for or towards or, creating in National Novel Writing Month. Just as an experiment to see, can I put words together in a very specific time frame around a very specific topic? And there are so many aspects to this thing. It is deeply comical in one regard. And to lose that comedic element, it can't be lost. It has to be there. It has to be present. And in addition to it, it's incredibly dark and incredibly sad and quite tactile as well. So I want these elements to all be contained in the sheer hopelessness that this thing gives. But I reflect on the film Smoke Signals. Smoke Signals is a film it's a kind of coming-of-age film about 2 friends, 2 unlikely friends, one of whom is a former chief's son. I don't know if the father is a chief actually, but a party house, the head of a party house on a reservation. His son and his very curious, super nerd friend who spends time with him, who doesn't appear to have parents. In fact, his parents die in a tragic fire that the other fellows, this is a spoiler, I guess. Let's just say there are lots of interesting juxtapositions in Smoke Signals. And part of the juxtapositions is the fact that one of the central characters is the antithesis of everything that you might assume Native Americans are about. It's really very curious. In fact, there are 6 nerd Native American characters in this. It's not about cliches at all. It's about taking a series of circumstances and presenting it in a really interesting light. And I think that is the model that I'm looking for here, to offer an account of something which is rarely talked about, but also is so central to the fabric of the community in which I live. And I think that is an interesting thought experiment, just getting into that thought experiment associated with who this character is, what this character does, what motivates the trajectory of this character. Some of this came when I was in the community organisation and they talked about Gang of Thrones, which is the circumstance that, it's the police code name, the DEA code name, for the bus that took down the house with the alligator in it at the end of my street, but also, the related gang members and the San Jose police officer that was, part of this thing. And what came through that was actually a few of the lower tier gang members were actually San Jose State students. They were university students and gang members. And that juxtaposition just, I guess it set off a little light in my mind, thinking, that's really interesting, that these gangs are now recruiting far more broadly than one might initially think about, associate with. And part of this is a way, not necessarily of understanding, because I think probably what will come through this is actually going to be very curious. When I was a boy, particularly, well, let's say in my early teenage years, my mother was involved with, was a member of a writers group called Seven Writers in Canberra in Australia. And she had writer friends that would set novels in New York, having never been to New York, or would write about living in Seattle when they had never set foot in Seattle. So this experience is not necessarily that, because I live in this community. I experience the community with my own particular perspective and, perceptions. But that doesn't mean that I don't have some kind of understanding of certain elements in this community. And maybe a lot of what comes through this is completely wrong. But what I find fascinating in the Smoke Signals case was that through curious perturbations, more understanding can come through this thing. And I think rather than looking at the strange, corrupt cycles that exist here as a, curious negative thing, maybe embracing that in writing will come to some degree of resolution associated with my own thinking about it. So it's actually going to be a really interesting thing to work through. And I think part of that is associated with narrative style exploration, but also really basic planning, working out the trajectory of this thing. So for the month of November, I may not be as productive as I have been. You might say, well, listening to this podcast, hardly productive, Tom, hardly productive. But I am going to be devoting some time to getting this thing together. And the discipline of writing a novel is an interesting thing. It's an interesting discipline. You need to allocate a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of strategy. And to do this in a month is quite extreme. But I think I'm probably up for the challenge, and I'm actually really looking forward to it. So that's my thoughts associated with this thing.